Playing Nirvana.
The Cobain 50.
Nirvana.
Kurt Cobain's top 50 albums.
Nirvana.
From listener-powered KEXP.
This is the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. I'm Dusty Henry.
And I'm Martin Douglas. This week, Dusty Henry dives into the album Never Mind the Bollocks by the Sex Pistols, released in 1977. One of the greatest punk rock albums of all time, arguably the greatest.
Definitely a strong argument to make. I was very scared approaching this one, knowing like any of the big albums on this list, I get kind of freaked out about. Like, how do you approach it? What else is there to say? But I think we found our way eventually.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest. I came into this episode ready to diss this record, and then I listened to it a couple weeks ago, and I couldn't stop listening to it because it's so good. It reminded me how good this album is, and I am very stoked to talk with you about it.
Yeah, me too. I had a similar experience, but yeah, maybe we should get into it.
Without further ado, this is Dusty Henry with Never Mind the Bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols.
It's 1976, and the British television news magazine show, Today, has just had a major cancellation. The band Queen was scheduled to appear, but they suddenly canceled due to a dental emergency for singer Freddie Mercury. As a last-second replacement, the show books a buzzy and controversial new band.
Not the nice, clean Rolling Stones. You see, they're as drunk as I am. They're clean by comparison. They're a group called the Sex Pistols. And I'm surrounded now by all of them. Just let us see the Sex Pistols in action.
To say that host Bill Grundy didn't know what he was getting into would be an understatement. Those next few minutes of live television made the Sex Pistols' career, and they tanked Bill Grundy's.
I am told that group have received £40,000 from a record company. Doesn't that seem to be slightly opposed to their anti-materialistic view of life?
The more the merrier.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, tell me more about it.
We've spent it, haven't we?
I don't know, have you?
Yeah. It's all gone.
Really?
Down the boozer.
40, really? Good Lord. Now,
If you somehow didn't catch those expletives there, singer Johnny Rotten makes it clear in a moment.
That's just their tough tricks.
It's what?
Nothing, a rude word. Next question.
No. What was the rude word? Shit. Was it really? Good heavens, you frightened me to death.
All right.
And for a little extra garnish from guitarist Steve Jones,
Are you, Go on, you've got another 5 seconds. Say something outrageous.
You dirty bastard.
Go on, again.
You dirty
What a clever boy.
What a f***ing rotter.
Well, that's it for tonight. The other rocker, Abel, and I'm saying nothing else about him, will be back tomorrow. I'll be seeing you soon. I hope I'm not seeing you again. From me, though, good night.
following the interview, there was a relentless outcry from British tabloids and the general public. Grundy was put on a 2-week suspension for how he handled the interview, and the show would be canceled within 2 months. And while the Sex Pistols themselves were also in the crosshairs of the general public, they thrived under that scrutiny. The Sex Pistols were a mess. A calculated, well-thought-out, diabolical mess. But a mess nonetheless. This should come as no surprise, given that their name invokes sex and violence. The Pistols didn't invent punk rock. As with any genre, finding a clear starting point is nearly impossible. We dug into this frequently on KEXP's award-winning 50 Years of Hip-Hop series, which you'll find published on this very podcast feed. For example, the Ramones released their self-titled debut a year before the Pistols. The Detroit-based group Death preceded the Ramones in 1971, but wouldn't get their claim until the 2013 documentary, A Band Called Death. And if you dig back further, you've got the Sonics from Seattle. Wait, sorry, wrong Sonics. But quick aside, come on, let's bring them back already. What I meant to say was the Tacoma Sonics, who were making heavy music back in the mid-60s.
See, there's a girl who's new in town. Well, you better watch out now, or she'll put you down. 'Cause she's an evil chick. Say she's the wicked.
We can spiral down the rabbit hole all day, trying to figure out who started punk. At that point, we'd be no better than that Spider-Man meme where he's pointing at copies of himself. But if you want to point towards a band that crystallized what punk would become, your middle finger would move right towards the Sex Pistols. Nirvana's Never Mind album gets a lot of praise for bringing punk to the masses. But there's an argument that it's not even the most significant Never Mind record in punk's history. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Sex Pistols' history is something of punk lore. Numerous books, movies, and TV shows have been written about the group, as well as about the individual members. Since newcomers are still discovering the band, though, we'll hit the highlights here. Before the Sex Pistols, there was a group called The Strand, sometimes called the Swankers. The band was formed in 1972 by teenager Steve Jones on vocals, drummer Paul Cook, and Wally Nightingale on guitar. Jones and Cook claimed that they started playing on instruments that they'd stolen. It was around this time that the trio started hanging out at a clothing store called Let It Rock. The shop's selection harkened back to the style of 1950s rock and roll, and became synonymous with the punk style emerging in the 1970s. The shop was co-owned by designer Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren. McLaren took special interest in music. He and Westwood helped style the American group, the New York Dolls.
If you don't know what I'm doing, what you know is try us. Pick it up, take them lights away. Try us, come on, get it up, don't throw your love away. Try us, come on, pick it up, don't try to take my night away.
At some point, they renamed their store to be simply called Sex, focusing less on 50s nostalgia and more on fetish and bondage gear. In all of its iterations, the shop was starting to define the punk look. While certainly the music was important, the aesthetics cannot be overlooked as playing a crucial role in the rise of punk rock. After years of the Strand band members hanging out around the shop, McLaren finally started to take the group seriously and agreed to work with them. He just had one catch. Nightingale had to go. McLaren felt Nightingale didn't really mesh with his vision for the band and their aesthetic. He was swiftly replaced on bass by Glenn Matlock, an art student who would also pick up shifts at Sex. There'd be another shakeup in the lineup. Jones felt increasingly uncomfortable in the role of frontman and opted to focus on guitar. And the look of the singer was crucial to McLaren. One qualifier was they could not have long hair. At some point, they just approach young men with short hair and ask, "Hey, can you sing?" They even tried to get icon Richard Hell multiple times to join the band, just to get multiple rejections. It was the Clash's manager, Bernard Rhodes, who would make a world-changing discovery. He'd taken notice of a young man with short green hair wearing a Pink Floyd shirt. But the shirt had been modified. Above the band's name, it read, "I hate," and the eyes had been poked out of the band members' faces. That young man's name was John Lydon, and he was shortly after invited to come audition at the shop. During his audition, Lydon sang an off-key version of Alice Cooper's I'm 18, accompanied by the store's jukebox. got the job. Jones even christened him with a new name, Johnny Rotten. With a new lineup, they needed a new name.
Thus,
The Sex Pistols
we're born!
With barely any music to their name, the group started playing around London and quickly amassed fans. But not just that, they were starting to inspire other artists who were enamored with their look and attitude. Susie Sue, Billy Idol, Joe Strummer, and others saw the Pistols as leaders in a new movement that made them want to redirect their own work. Jamie Reed, a visual artist and friend of McLaren, also was taken by the band's energy. Reed officially started working with the band in 1976, developing their iconic logo, which was inspired by magazine cutout notes left by kidnappers. With the hype building and the vision solidifying, it was time for the band to finally release some recorded music. And boy, they did. In October of 1976, they released their first single, Anarchy, in the UK. There's a high chance that if you know any Sex Pistols song, it's probably this one. The song erupts with a barrage of guitars, thunderous drum fills, Johnny Rotten's maniacal laugh before he declares, "I am an antichrist. I am an anarchist." While there's been plenty of music before this that carried an ominous energy, it's hard to think of a song that felt this menacing.
I am an antichrist. I am an anarchist. Don't know what I want, but I know how to get it. I want to destroy, possibly, 'cause I want to be anarchy.
Jamie Reed designed the cover for the single. It features the British Union Jack ripped up and held together by safety pins. Paired to the Rotten's lyrics, it's a full indictment of the United Kingdom in the mid-70s. For people like Rotten, who grew up in poverty and were just trying to survive day to day, the UK was far from the pristine and royal image it portrayed to the world. As we talked about in the Clash episode earlier in the series, shit-talking is a core tenet of punk music. Anarchy in the UK takes its aim at a whole nation and its way of life. In the song's fourth verse, he questions just how united the United Kingdom really is. He reminds us of the Irish Republican Army, the Ulster Defense Association, and the MPLA movement of Angola.
Is this the MPLA, or is this the UDA, or is this the IRA? I thought it was a UK.
It was a biting political commentary that would make even Thomas Paine wince. And it was delivered from snot-nosed punks with weird-colored hair advised by S&M stylists. After the single release, the Pistols became notorious in the UK. All the attention led to them even appearing on Grundy's news program. And, well, you already heard how that went.
You dirty son. You dirty old man.
Well, keep going, Chick, keep going.
In the months after the profanity-filled interview, things only heated up. In response to the broadcast, the Daily Mail branched the headline, "The Filth and the Fury." Sex Pistols stood as a contrast to what was considered common decency, respect, and conservative values. The band toured the single, Anarchy in the UK, with The Clash and Johnny Thunders, only to be met with protests outside their shows. Factory workers refused to press the single on vinyl. Bernard Crook Partridge, who then served on the Greater London Council, called them the antithesis of humankind. Even the Pistols' label, EMI, dropped them. The Pistols eventually paid tribute to their former label with a not-so-subtle diss track called EMI.
The siren friends are crucified.
how could any of this conceivably slow down the band? For a group that was all about being antagonistic, this was like throwing jet fuel on a brush fire. Instead of languishing in the underground with their like-minded peers, suddenly everyone in the UK knew who they were. And sure, they had people who hated them, but that means their music and message was reaching people it might otherwise never have reached. Suddenly, punk and anarchy were mainstream. Here's band manager McLaren alongside Johnny Rotten on the BBC program Nationwide in 1976.
Malcolm McLaren, you discovered and managed the group. Now, what about the accusation that you're more into chaos than anything else?
Well, that's an accusation by people who really don't understand what kids want. Kids want excitement. They want things that are going to transform what is basically a very boring life for them right now. And music, young rock music, is the only thing they have that they thought that they controlled. And if you look in the charts, they don't really have anything to do with it.
Punk, it means worthless, nasty. Johnny Rotten, are you happy with this word?
No, the press gave us it. It's their problem, not ours. We never called ourselves punk.
Which bands do you think are really old hat now? Are you against the Stones and the Who? Sounds like that?
Yes, of course, because they're established. They just do not mean anything to anyone.
As the band delighted in the public scrutiny, they still had internal tensions. In early 1977, the band got back in the studio, and Glenn Matlock quickly became the focus of the band's ire. Reports vary depending on which member or associate you talk to. McLaren says it was because Matlock liked the Beatles. Jones says it was because Matlock didn't fit the Pistols' aesthetic. As for Matlock himself, he more or less says he was tired of Rotten's shit. Nevertheless, Matlock was let go, and there was a void to fill. Enter Sid Vicious. Here's Sid Vicious in 1977, explaining his induction into the Pistols in the documentary The Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
I was getting my own group together, the Flowers of Romance, and Rotten asked me if I wanted to join there's this big hoo-ha, and Malcolm said, it's all a big secret, man, you know. Come down to this pub at such and such now. And I thought they were going to do me over because I didn't turn up to one of Rotten's parties or something. He gets touchy over things like that. And I went down there and he said, do you want to play bass for the Sex Pistols? All I did was cash in on the fact that I'm good looking and I have a good figure and girls like me. Well, they want a angel in flares and an anorak, because if they want that, that ain't me, baby.
Vicious, whose real name was John Ritchie, hardly knew how to play bass. He taught himself by playing along to the Ramones' first record. Supposedly during recording sessions, the band would actively try to keep him from recording because he was so inept. Jones would end up recording most of his parts. But Vicious certainly looked and felt like what you would imagine a Sex Pistol to be, with his leather jackets, spiky hair, and Doc Martens. Vicious was able to match Rotten's energy, much more than Jones or Cook. This was great for the band's image, but tumultuous for a functioning group. Vicious had a notorious reputation for himself. At a Sex Pistols show at the 100 Club, before he was even in the band, he attacked a former member, Nick Kent, who was also a writer for the British news outlet New Musical Express, aka NME. Kent was supposedly blocking his view, and Vicious, high on speed, lashed him with a bicycle chain. And another time at the 100 Club, he hurled a glass bottle on stage during a performance by The Damned. The glass shattered, and it blinded a woman in one eye. So, Vicious was arrested. As McLaren once said, if Johnny Rotten is the voice of punk, then Vicious is the attitude. Needless to say, things were only going to get crazier for the Pistols. On March 10th, 1977, the band signed with A&M Records. signing their contract in front of Buckingham Palace. Immediately afterward, the inebriated band went to A&M's office, where Vicious broke a toilet and Rotten lashed out at the staff. Later at a club, the Pistols fought with another band. Friends of A&M staff and friends of the Pistols also began making threats at each other. By March 16th, not even a week later, A&M ended their contract with the Pistols. But again, things were just really revving up. High on their newfound infamy, and some other substances too, the band lashed out again at their country, this time taking aim at one of its most reverent figures. Queen Elizabeth II was set to commemorate her Silver Jubilee, celebrating her first 25 years on the throne. Like the good citizens they were, the Pistols decided to add their own tribute offering. Taking its name from the British national anthem, God Save the Queen is a direct indictment of the Queen and the monarchy. Like Anarchy in the UK, the song is not subtle. They immediately equate her with a fascist regime and the hydrogen bomb. According to the band, they wrote the song long before they were aware of any Jubilee. But once they did know about it, they knew the timing would be perfect. Or terrible. Depends on who you asked at the time. At a moment when the country was supposed to be gathering to pay homage to their monarch, the Pistols barged in like the Kool-Aid Man with a big glass of cherry red nihilism. God save the Queen! She ain't no human being! There is no future in England's dreaming! The song was originally set to be released by A&M and even had 25,000 copies pressed. But because of all the bad blood between the band and the label, nearly all copies were destroyed. When Virgin Records signed the band and got set to release the single, once again, pressing plant workers protested and refused to work, partly because of the song's content, but also the single artwork. This time, it featured the Queen's face, obscured by the band's name and song title in the iconic magazine cutout font. The BBC banned the song from being played on air. To further the controversy, McLaren arranged for a boat to sail down the River Thames 2 days before Queen Elizabeth would make a similar procession down the river. The plan was for the band to play the song aboard the boat while passing Parliament and Westminster Pier. But they never got that far. There was an uproar about the stunt, and the police forcibly made the boat dock. They arrested McLaren, Westwood, and others involved. During Jubilee Week, the song landed at number 2 on the UK charts, just behind Rod Stewart's I Don't Want to Talk About It. I'm sure you can find the irony there. There have since been numerous accusations that the numbers didn't add up, that the industry was gamed to prevent the Pistols from topping the charts. The band were riding a wave of artistic success, but the public outcry only intensified. The band were frequently attacked. Not just media attacks, but actually physically attacked. Rotten himself was cornered by a knife-wielding gang and took tendon damage to his left arm. All members faced similar run-ins with the public. All of this uproar and controversy, and yet the band still hadn't put out an album. In fact, they'd been working on one since before their short-lived situationship with A&M. Working with producers Chris Thomas and Bill Price, the band started building the record between sessions in October of 1976 and the spring and summer of 1977. Despite the band's ramshackle demeanor and attitude, the band and producers took the process of making a capital G great album seriously. Well, for the most part. Like I said, Vicious could barely play his instrument, and only kind of sort of appears on the song Bodies and possibly on God Save the Queen, but no one could remember for sure. Vicious kept himself busy, though. In the same studio, the band Queen were recording down the hall. Vicious popped his head in to make fun of singer Freddie Mercury. He joked, "Have you brought ballet to the masses yet?" To which Mercury responded by calling him Simon Ferocious. Later, Rotten made his way into Queen's studio, walking on all fours saying, "Hello, Freddie." Queen's manager asked them to not do that again. Antics aside, the band emerged from these sessions with their debut album, Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols. It's quite literally Nevermind before Nirvana's Nevermind. And it was released to the adoring masses, who forgave the Pistols for their past transgressions, and they all lived happily ever after. This has been the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP. Yeah, that's obviously not what happened. The album's title might not raise a red flag abroad, but in the UK, it was immediately considered profane. Bollocks being the expletive here. The title came from Jones. While the band debated what to call it, he interjected with, "Oh, f*** it, never mind the bollocks of it all." And of course, stores refused to stock it. Government officials lambasted it, etc., etc. We've been here before. Typical fare for a Pistols release. Even still, the album debuted at number 1 on the UK charts. Beyond the controversy, beyond the style, beyond the attitude, Never Mind the Bollocks stands on its own and has rightfully earned its place as a classic album. The crystal clear production makes all the sneer and distortion shine. As I've said, the Pistols were never about subtlety. On this album, they make sure you hear everything they have to say. Every riff is in your face, but it never overshadows Rotten's spit and vigor. It's what makes it feel timeless. A template for punk to come. But don't just take my word for it. In a 1992 interview with Melody Maker, Kurt Cobain himself called it, quote, "the best production of any rock record I've ever heard." He added, "It's totally in your face and compressed. All the hype Sex Pistols had was totally deserved. They deserved everything that they got." Instead of taking a victory lap after releasing a critically acclaimed and commercially successful debut record, things went downhill for the band. Fast. The band embarked on a tour of the United States in 1978 and would nearly finish it before canceling their last 2 shows. Tensions were only getting worse within the band, as well as with McLaren. Vicious had a drug addiction that was only getting worse. And when he wasn't using, he went through terrible withdrawals and would physically lash out at the crowd, even spitting blood at the audience. Rotten also got sick, and he also coughed up blood at shows. And on top of that, Rotten and his bandmates were constantly fighting each other. On January 28, 1978, in San Francisco, the band played their last show of their tour. In fact, it'd be the last show of this iteration of the band, period. During the encore, Rotten took the mic and said, "You'll get one number and one number only, 'cause I'm a lazy bastard," before launching into a cover of the Stooges song, No Fun.
No fun. This is no fun. No fun. It is no fun at all. no fun.
It was clear that Rotten, nor anyone else in the band, was having fun. At the end, he said,
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Good night.
Dropped the mic, and walked away. And that was that. Rotten left the band. As for Vicious, he was in increasingly dire straits. His addiction was getting out of control. Vicious and his girlfriend Nancy Spungen had been together over the past year. Throughout that time, they both enabled their worst behaviors and drug use. Now that Rotten left the Pistols, Vicious and Spungen were free to do as they pleased, away from the band. After bouncing across Europe, the couple returned to New York, where they'd live at the Hotel Chelsea. Vicious began playing solo gigs, with Spungen acting as his manager. Vicious often got confrontational with the audience, yelling at the crowd between covers of the Stooges and Frank Sinatra. But things quickly took a much darker turn for Vicious and Spungen. On October 11th, 1978, Spungen was found dead in their hotel room from a stab wound in her abdomen. The night before, Vicious had reportedly taken 32 Tylenol tablets. He was delirious. He both claimed he killed Spungen and denied it. His story kept changing, but ultimately investigators found the murder weapon, a knife Spungen had given him just days before. Paired with his testimony, Vicious was arrested for second-degree murder. After Virgin Records ponied up for legal fees, Vicious was released on a $50,000 bail. He would just need to stay in New York and sign in with the 3rd Homicide Unit daily. But it wouldn't be long before he got in trouble again. 2 months later, he'd have an altercation with Patti Smith's brother, Todd, cutting his face with a broken bottle. Vicious was sent to Rikers Island prison and made to go into a detox program. In February of '79, Vicious was let go. He immediately met with a friend to go get some heroin and spent the whole night doing drugs. He was found dead the next morning from an apparent overdose. In his pocket was a note. "We had a death pact, and I have to keep my half of the bargain. Please bury me next to my baby. Bury me in my leather jacket, jeans, and motorcycle boots. Goodbye."
What is a brain? What has he got when he wears hats and he cannot side up things he truly feels, but only the words of one of Neil's. The record shows on that afloat and did it
You would think that the Sex Pistols were effectively inactive during all of this. How could they continue without Rotten or Vicious, the most infamous and arguably iconic members of the group? But in June of 1978, Jones and Cook returned with a new single and a new singer.
God save the Sex Pistols. They're a bunch of wholesome blokes. They just like wearing filthy clothes. That's what filthy jokes.
The song No One Is Innocent features Ronnie Biggs on vocals. Biggs wasn't known for being a musician, but rather a notorious criminal. He was a part of the Great Train Robbery of 1963, a famous caper stealing 2.5 million pounds, or about $3 million US, from a Royal Mail train. Biggs was hiding out in Brazil, where he was immune from British authorities. It's a strange coda to Never Mind the Bollocks. Biggs is self-referential to both himself and the Pistols. He opens the song blurting, "God save the Sex Pistols. They're a bunch of wholesome blokes." He name-checks Bill Grundy, makes fun of the Pistols' clothes, and sarcastically calls out Martin Bormann and other Nazis on the run. And for Biggs himself, he claims that he's, quote, seen the light and sold his soul for punk. What to make of this? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. While everything is falling apart for the band, they line themselves with criminals and try to take the piss out of themselves. Something in there is very punk. So, what happened to Johnny Rotten? Well, you'll just need to wait until we get to our episode on Public Image Limited's Flowers of Romance. Never Mind the Bollocks ended up being the Sex Pistols' only album. As good as their music is on its own, the album feels more like a manifestation of the legend and precedent set by the band. The songs are imbued with history. Their anti-authoritarian antics, the way they dressed, the attitude that would become synonymous with punk.
Start this song without any words. I got so high, scratched till I bled. Love myself better than you. Know it's wrong. What should I do?
All of these Sex Pistols shenanigans were happening while Kurt Cobain was still a kid. In his adulthood, as a musician, Kurt was building off the lineage and precedent set by the Pistols. The way he boldly represented his values, his contentious relationship with the press, his contentious relationships in general, the way his music scared the old guard, but found a devoted audience in the youth who felt left behind. Kurt's own Nevermind also employed sleek, crisp production that helped it land with a larger audience. And yes, even some of the self-destructive behavior unfortunately showed up too. As Kurt elaborated to Melody Maker in '92, the only reason I might agree with people calling our band the Sex Pistols of the 90s is that for both bands, the music is a very natural thing, very sincere. But in terms of influence, no. Rock is too exhausted for that. We haven't produced a totally original sound like that. We might be uncompromising, but that's about it. We're an obvious metamorphosis. And to think, the band might have dismissed him completely for his long hair.
That was Dusty Henry with the Sex Pistols. Never Mind the Bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols. And yeah, like usually we ask each other, oh yeah, when's the first time you heard this album? I couldn't even tell you the first time I heard this album. I couldn't even tell you the first time I listened to the Sex Pistols and it registered in my head that like, oh yeah, I'm listening to this band, the Sex Pistols. Like it feels like one of those cellular experiences where it's always been in my life. Kind of like Michael Jackson. I don't have a moment where I first heard Michael Jackson because I've probably been listening to Michael Jackson since the womb.
I can say I do remember specifically mine. And I think it's gonna like, this is one of those like, outs me as younger. I've distinctly remember hearing Anarchy in the UK playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to say Guitar Hero.
Guitar Hero. It could go either way, but Tony Hawk, man, that was like the gateway drug to punk for like, I think a lot of like,
oh, a ton of people. Yeah. I remember the first, here I go dating myself. I remember the first Tony Hawk Pro Skater and like all of the songs that were on it. Like, I think that was the first time I heard Del the Funky Homo Sapien. But anyway, we're going off on a tangent. Yeah. Revisiting the album now, we both said in the intro that like we're kind of surprised how well this album holds up.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like I hadn't listened to this album in years, probably since like high school. And, you know, you start to build up these narratives in your head like, oh, yeah, I mean, we've heard so much music since then in our personal lives and so much punk. And it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, it's cool, but like blah, 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 whatever is cooler. Sometimes you go back to the source and you're just like, no, this fucking rules. Like, this is an awesome back to front record.
Yeah. And like, you also have to think about the context, John Lydon and his pivot to conservatism, which we'll get into in a few minutes. Sid Vicious and all of the fuckery that happened around Sid Vicious. Like the fact that this band was generated by a person trying to get rich and Malcolm McLaren And in spite of all of the context that would steer you away from it, that would make you think like, oh, this album isn't, as good as people says it is. It really is as good as people says it is.
I've heard the comment before that the Sex Pistols were the first boy band, which
yes,
there's
absolutely
a lot of truth to that. Like we get into, like they fired like Glenn Matlock and replaced him with Sid Vicious, who couldn't play bass, just because he looked the part. A funny thing, but also like hard to argue it was the wrong move in the long run. Like Sid Vicious, Sid Vicious is a controversial figure for a lot of good reason, but so much of the Sex Pistols, that was one thing thinking through this record, because I wasn't sure how to talk about this record that hadn't been said. And maybe I'm not even saying anything new, but so much of it is about the aesthetic, the mood, the attitude. And Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious, like if you're trying to conjure the quintessential punk image in your mind, you're probably imagining like one of the two or both of them.
Right. And like, I feel as though punk music has a very defined musical style. But when I listen to Never Mind the Bollocks, of course it's a punk record, but it reminds me of like the first wave of rock and roll, only just dirtier and snottier and brattier, and just like if it were a person, you would want to throw it out of a window. And that makes the music kick so much ass, like that they would take this style like, Bo Diddley, Willie Dixon, and just strip it of everything except for 3 chords and attitude, and a masterpiece is born.
Yeah, it's so like irreverent. It doesn't care about the history of rock and roll. It's just, it cares about what they want to say and what they want to do. And it's obviously building off of those building blocks, but I don't know. It's like, it's so antagonistic right down to the chord choices that they use, like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking of antagonistic, now is a good time for us to talk about John Lydon's heel turn and him basically turning into a conservative.
Yeah, he's suddenly like, hey, be nice to the Queen. like, dude, you wrote God Save the Queen. You called her a fascist and a hydrogen bomb. Like,
yeah,
wow.
Not a human being.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, supporting Trump and things that I don't want to say things that no real punk would ever condone, because we have this whole segment of like skinheads and like conservative punks, neo-Nazi punks, and, how punk has turned from a social movement into this weird thing on the other side where it's, I don't know. I don't really want to talk about that. But like this idea, okay, I've been really thinking about this because I knew we were going to talk about this. In December, my fiance and I had a Hanukkah party, and I was talking to our pal Matt. And let me give you a little context on Matt. Matt is like if a Saint Bernard were a person. And we happened to be talking about the Sex Pistols and John Lydon and what has happened to John Lydon. And somehow through this conversation, we stumbled on the fact that Lydon is a contrarian.
Right.
And so it's not about the idea of punk being a social movement. It's about the idea of punk being na 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 boo boo, which, I have no time for, but it's a very real thing in punk where you go against whatever the grain is, and somehow people think that, the leftist social movement or various leftist social movements like Marxism, communism, whatever, are the establishment now, which I don't agree with whatsoever. I think it's absolutely asinine that someone would think that and then say, oh, the conservatives are the real rebels, when they're the ruling class. Right. They're the people that are in these positions of legislative authority and still oppressing people, still like putting their boots on the neck of, you know, poor people, people of color, queer people, whoever. And it's just, yeah, just I feel very, very strongly about this whole John Lydon thing. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's almost to the point where like the punk or contrarianism is like less of an ideology, more of just like a branding.
Yeah,
right. It's like, well, we're the real punks because we're going against whatever, and like you can copy and paste that to either any side of an issue, and it's like how like Sex Pistols and John Lydon were like, I agree, like contrarian, but like Lydon is almost a case of showing its limits. Mm-hmm. Like if you're just always going against, what are you for?
Yeah, you bring up a very important point. Punk is not just about standing against something, it's standing for something.
Which the Pistols did so amazingly on this record. And it's hard when you know, this isn't the only case of an artist doing this, but you know, when you grow up with an artist or an artist means something to you and they represent this ideal and they go another way in life, it's hard to reckon with. And I thought about that a lot working on this episode and tried to kind of pay tribute to those early days. But we're going to get into this some more when we get to the PIL episode too, I'm sure.
Absolutely. This piece was produced by Dusty Henry. The audio was mixed by Roddy Nikpour. Our podcast manager is Isabel Khalili. And Larry Mizell Jr. is our director of editorial.
And as always, if you like what you hear on this podcast and want to keep supporting us doing what we do and listener-powered storytelling, give us some money. Why not? We depend on your support to keep it going. You can become an amplifier or leave a one-time donation at kexp.org/Cobain.
With that said, I'm Martin Douglas.
And I'm Dusty Henry. We'll see you next week on the Cobain 50 from listener-powered KEXP, where the music matters.
May I have more porridge?
Yeah. More? You want more? The amount of times I said bollocks working on this episode myself.
Honestly, a Steely Dan cover of this album would probably bang.
That really would, actually.